We find out in a fashion.
What?
We'll have to get through the end of the book to really have the discussion about Clarice. So can we postpone that until the end? Just so that you know how everything ends, and that will make things a little more clear. All right.
Can we discuss, because there was a day I wasn't here, about how, like, people might be, like, changing the past from what it actually is? Like, you know how Benjamin Franklin was, like...
You need to go watch my YouTube video. That was the last thing that I recorded in here.
I was.
We did, and actually I'm about to summarize all that right now. So, all right. Actually, let's go ahead and begin. Keep your fingers crossed. Perfect. All right, so part one was the hearth and the salamander. And this was Beatty's conversation with Montag, and really we're thinking about each part in this book being like a stage in life, okay? So if we said there's 3 stages in life. According to Piaget, there's 4, but that's neither here nor there. You can check out Piaget at some point in your future. He's awesome. But we're going to say there's 3. Childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, where the first section is childhood, characterized by ineptitude and ignorance, and really emotional and logical immaturity. The inability to handle your emotions or to hold complex thoughts. All this should be familiar, right? For everybody except for you. And Beatty was the one that told us that. He kind of gave us the history of the firemen, which ultimately results in the history of the civilization. Right? How did this society come to be the way that it is? And he told us that as population increased, the amount of variety offered to people decreased so that you could serve a wider population. He told us that technology increased, and therefore the amount of time people had for general self-reflection decreased. What happened because of that? Because people were exposed to less variety, and they had less time to reflect, people were uncomfortable feeling negative, and they wanted all negative stimuli eliminated from their life. And specifically, Bradbury, through Beatty, tells us that these feelings were the feelings of inferiority, the feelings of offense, or the feelings of sadness. So Beatty essentially says that that history of the firemen is fake. What happened was, from the ground up, since people did not want to have these emotions because they lacked variety and the time to reflect, they didn't want to experience this, they said, please take it away from me. I can't handle these negative feelings. Put the world in bubble wrap so I don't injure myself, right? And because of that, what they missed out on was that next stage of growth. Ideally, as you gain maturity, you would realize inferiority makes you want to work. Being offended should make you want to learn more about that subject or fix the problem. Sadness will help you understand what it is that you cherish. But because we're talking about a society trapped in perpetual childhood, right? They can't do this for themselves. So the society pretty much then commandeered the firemen and said, hey, we want you to do this for us, right? And in this section, we also had talked a little bit about how Montag really said we should be bothered every now and then. Now, that's part one. We're going to move into part 2, right? This is the adolescent stage. But before we dive into part 2, there are a few things in this section that are worth noting in terms of really understanding the status of this culture. So, what page did I said 78 was one. What was the other page? 91. Flip to page 91. Can you find, this is either 90 or 91, the paragraph that says, when do you suppose the war will start? Right? War is mentioned throughout this entire novel, frequently, but in a very blasé, passing sense. Right? The jets are mentioned. When will the war start? So it goes down, Mrs. Phelps, right? These are Mildred's friends. I'm not worried, said Mrs. Phelps. I'll let Pete do all the worrying. I'll let old Pete do all the worrying. Not me, I'm not worried. Anytime somebody says they're not worried 3 or 4 times in a row, you know what I think?
They're worried.
They're probably worried, right? Are you trying to convince me, or are you trying to convince yourself? Yes, said Millie, let old Pete do the worrying. It's always someone else's husband dies, they say. I've heard that too. I've never known any dead man killed in a war. Killed jumping off of buildings, yes. Like Gloria's husband last week. But from wars, no. It's a pretty casual mention of suicide, isn't it? And they happen all the time. Like, oh yeah, people jump off buildings all the time. Like her husband last week. Not from wars. Now, a little bit further, we find out how they're handling the institution of marriage. It's our third marriage each, and we're independent. Be independent, we always said. He said, if I get killed off, you just go right ahead and don't cry, but get married again and don't think of me. In my book, what's that question right there?
Why be married?
Yeah, that was the immediate thought when I read that. It's like, then what is the purpose of being married? Remember, in Beatty's conversation, he said, funerals make you sad, just send the person to the incinerator in 5 minutes, they're a speck of dust, nobody worries about it. Okay? The house, the nuclear family, has always been a cornerstone of civilization. It is the test kitchen through which we learn how to interact. The way you interact with your parents is the way you learn to interact with authority. And I say parents, guardian, grandparent, depends on who all lives in that house, but that's how you learn to interact with authority. Right? Ultimately, that could be a teacher in the future, that could be a boss in the future, but it gives you a grasp of how to handle authority. And if you've got siblings, then you start to understand how to interact with your peers. And once you leave the household, you take that framework, that socio-emotional framework, out into the world, and you start to test it against other people. And if it went well in the house, then when you go out into the real world, your interactions with people are satisfying and beneficial and meaningful, right? So we're starting with this is their concept of marriage. My husband's like, if I die, and this is the third time they've been married, if I die, don't worry, just go get married again. Now, if that's the marriage, look at how they think of childhood. This might be your next page. May I look at?
I think it's 90.
I'm on 96, so you'd probably be on 93, looking for the paragraph that says, I wouldn't say that, said Mrs. Bowles.
Oops, that's on 92 at the bottom.
92?
Yeah.
Yep, down to the bottom of 92. Good call. All right. I wouldn't say that, says Mrs. Bowles. What they're talking about here, how are your children? You know I don't have any. No one in his right mind, the good Lord knows, would have children. Oh, they're kind of cool. I'm not saying have them early, right? Wait. But it's pretty satisfying. You get to make like the coolest humans you would want to make. And be the best friends that you'll have because they're yours, right? But wait, I'm not saying be in a hurry. I'm 38 and I'm just embarking on this adventure. So, but let's see what she says. What qualities are deemed important here? I wouldn't say that. I've had 2 children by cesarean section. No use going through all that agony for a baby. All right. What would the agony be?
The pain of the baby.
Labor, right? She's like, I didn't want to go through pain for the baby, so I just had him give me a C-section. And you'll find out, like, it wasn't necessary. So she says, the world must reproduce, you know, the race must go on. Besides, they sometimes look like you, and that's nice. That's what they're characterizing as the best value a child could have, is that they look like you.
Sometimes.
Right? 2 cesareans turn the trick. Yes, sir. Oh, my doctor said cesareans aren't necessary. You've got the hips for it. Everything's normal. But I insisted. She didn't want to go through labor. She doesn't want to experience any pain or any sacrifice for her children. If that is the frame of mind, probably not in the right frame of mind to be a good parent, right? And if we go down, she says, I plunk the children in school 9 days out of 10. I put up with them when they come home 3 days a month. It's not all bad. You heave them into the parlor and turn the switch. It's like washing clothes. Let the severity of that statement sink in for a minute. It's like washing clothes. I would hope that my parents viewed me a little bit differently than a pile of dirty laundry, right? She's like, oh, it's nice when they look like you. They're only home 3 days out of the month, and when they're home 3 days out of the month, she throws them in front of a TV and thinks of them as she would a pile of dirty rags. Okay? These are telltale signs of how bad this civilization has become. Next, I just want to look briefly at the way their government is set up to function. Because right down below, that sounds fine. They're talking about politics. See where Mrs. Bowles said, I voted last election, same as everyone. I laid it on the line for President Noble. I think he's one of the nicest looking men ever became president. That's what I want out of a leader. I need them to be nice looking. I need my children to look like me. It's the best thing they could ever achieve. And I need my leaders to be nice looking. Starting to see a problem here? Now, you go in further. Oh, but the man they ran against him. This is where it gets interesting. He wasn't much, was he? Kind of small and homely. Didn't shave too close or comb his hair very well. What possessed the outs to run him? Now, if one political party is called the outs, what would you assume or infer the other one is called? Okay, so look at the description here. You just don't go running a little short man like that against a tall man. Besides, he mumbled. Half the time I couldn't hear a word he said, and the words I did hear, I didn't understand. Fat too, and didn't dress to hide it. No wonder the landslide was for Winston Noble. Now, in 1953, who do you think the most famous Winston in the planet was?
Churchill.
Winston Churchill, right? Even their names helped. Compare Winston Noble to Hubert Hogue for 10 seconds, and you can almost figure out the results.
Hoover.
The ins run a tall, handsome man named Winston Noble, and the outs run Hubert Hogue, a short, fat, homely, mumbling, unkempt guy. All right. I can control how you answer a question by controlling the question I ask. It's the illusion of choice instead of real choice. So for instance, real choice. Dream car and color.
White Corvette.
A white Corvette. Nice.
69 Mustang black.
Ooh,
Ferrari.
nice. Any particular color? All right. See? Just got something different. I'm a truck person personally. I just like to be able to run over things, right? I mean, I can't lie. Like, I see that. I'm like, I could run over that, all right? You sports car people, like, I could run away from it, whatever. But that's true choice. Your preferred car in the preferred color, okay? Now, let me offer you the opposite. You are going to get a Toyota Camry. You can have it in green, or you can have it in crap brown. Who wants the green Camry? Right? I know how many people are going to select green. Pretty much everybody, because I controlled the nature of my question. It's the illusion of choice. I offered you a choice. You think you have a choice. I don't actually have to have any crap brown Camrys, because I know you're not going to select them. Right? In this Democratic election, they said it was a landslide. Do you think anybody was surprised by that? It's the illusion of choice. The outs, the ins. And that's how you keep people satisfied. They feel like they're participating, like they have a say in what's going on, without ever actually having a say in the first place. All right? And they don't know any better. So I mentioned this because this is the world in which Montag lives, right? Nuclear families, the household, totally lacking in relationships. Husband and wives not really concerned whether the other one dies. Children who show up just for vanity purposes to look like the parents. And the parents don't want to sacrifice or suffer, even in the giving labor or in the taking them outside to play. None of that. Like, I hope they look like me and I hope they shut up and go in front of the television. Right? And you've got a political system that offers all the people the illusion of choice, but choice not actually existing. Okay? As Montag moves from, right, childhood, emotional and logical immaturity, right? The people in this civilization don't have the ability to hold the concept of the illusion of choice in their minds. Otherwise, they'd say this is not actually a real election. But Montag is beginning to grow out of childhood and into adolescence. So when we start thinking about adolescence, the sieve and the sand, what was the story that this title came from? In here, what event? was told, I think it was a nickel or $5, whatever it was. His cousin or something would give Montag some money. He managed to fill a sieve with sand. Is that possible? No, not in the least bit. Right? It's like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill over and over and over again. In this section, Montag is the sieve, right? And in a way, everybody in the society is. And the sand is what they're missing, right? Right now, Montag thinks it's books. Difference is Montag actually wants to fix it, his brain, so that it can contain the sand, where it's just pouring through with everybody else, all right? Now, said part 2 is adolescence. Adolescence really is characterized by rebellion. And rebellion is a good thing, right? It serves the function of allowing you to set up your own identity separate of your parents, okay? Because a child is dependent on the parents. And it's as tough for the parent often as it is for the child to relinquish that very close connection. And through rebellion, and actually through arguments, you begin to establish your own identity and persona separate from theirs, and you're still dependent on them to a large extent, but much less than you were. Nobody's crapping themselves to, spite their parents, are they? All right. So that rebellion allows you to create separation. It's an indication that you're going to have to start parting ways and becoming your own person, right? It can manifest in terms of, sneaking out, doing something you're not supposed to. Linguistically, it manifests as slang. A lot of slang is established, teenage to early 20s, a way to communicate with your peers that is exclusive to your peer group and that adults won't understand. And every generation, right, every group generates its new slang. And then the usage tends to die off dramatically after 25. Just don't use it very much anymore. But that's a linguistic manifestation of rebellion. But the ideas in rebellion is that young people are going to go out and change the world. They see a problem, they want to fix it. But a lot of that is also being able to manifest and establish their own identity in the world. And this is where Montag is now. He's been dependent, but he's starting to feel like, I need something more. Who am I? And like that question Clarice asked him, am I happy? Right? So he goes to find Faber, the English teacher. And Faber really sets him up, and this is where you were on page 78, and he's going to talk to him about what is missing. So if we want to think about Faber's conversation being laid on top of, or in this case, right beside, Beatty's conversation, the history of the firemen, how the civilization became, is really the question of how did this important component of society go missing? How did it go away? Now, we're going to be asking ourselves, what went away? Okay? How versus what? So, let's see. There we go. Montag starts. Nobody listens anymore. I can't talk to the walls because they're yelling at me. I can't talk to my wife. She listens to the walls. I just want someone to hear what I have to say. And maybe if I talk long enough, it'll make sense. I want you to teach me to understand what I read. Conversation is fundamentally important to the human being. It is how we discover what we think and how we clarify what we think. It is through speaking our ideas to somebody and them giving us a response, we can find out what we're saying is ridiculous or not. And sometimes even just figure out what we think. Montag has nobody to talk to, so these ideas are stuck in his head. He doesn't know what to do with them, right? Faber calls him a hopeless romantic. It would be funny if it were not serious. It's not books you need. It's some of the things that once were in books. The same thing could be in the parlor families today. The same infinite detail and awareness could be projected through radios and televisors, but are not. No, it's not books you're looking for. It's what was once in them. Books were only one of the receptacles where we stored a lot of the things we were afraid we might forget. There's nothing magical in them. The magic is only in what the book said. Right? Montag is under the belief that if I give everybody a book, maybe society will be better. And Faber's like, pump the brakes. That's a little bit of an immature idea. It's not actually a binding in paper that is doing anything magical, right? That could just as well be a paperweight. So what is it about them that's actually missing? All right, and he tells us how many things? Right? 3. He lays this out very clearly, especially when we compare it to Beatty, that Faber is going to make it a lot easier for Montag to follow. So the first one, right? Number 1, do you know why books such as this are so important? Because they have quality, textures, pores, right? Telling fresh detail. So the first thing that's missing is the quality of detail and information. All right? The more pores, the more truthfully recorded details of life per square inch you can get on a sheet of paper, the more literary you are. That's my definition anyway. Telling detail, fresh detail. The good writers touch life often. The mediocre ones run a quick hand over her. The bad ones rape her and leave her for the flies. All right. Was To Kill a Mockingbird a happy book? James immediately, like I saw that head like start shaking before I finished the question. It's not, is it? Are you glad you read it? Okay. And there might be some vindication at the end when Boo Radley kills Bob Ewell, but it's certainly not like a feel-good jaunt through the South in the early 20s, right? Makes people angry, makes people sad. And in California recently, there was a school district that banned the book. Wouldn't let their students read it. Some parents got upset. What do you think made them upset? The what? Okay. Well, what subject matter did difficult conversation touch on? Right. Difficult racial conversations. Do you think the book encourages prejudice and bigotry? All right, it opposes it. But in order to do that, does it use some words that are painful and derogatory and people of good conscience would not hurl those words at people, right? Do those words need to exist in the book in order to be able to stimulate that conversation and understand? I think so. Imagine living in North Dakota in 1960 during the Civil Rights Movement. There's a strong chance you might have lived in a small town in North Dakota. Everybody's white, right? It would be tough to identify with the Civil Rights Movement, not because that town is prejudiced, but just geographically isolated, that you might not be able to understand the nuances of the Civil Rights Movement without having a book like To Kill a Mockingbird to take you somewhere and show you what life is like in a different portion of the world. Because that book has high quality detail and information. It touches life. It is real. It feels real. Now, the question is, what happened to all this high quality of information? Well, we eliminated variety, right? To sell more books. Okay? And just like Beatty told us, they don't want to be offended, right? Because this is what people asked for. So the quality of detail disappeared when variety stopped being published and when people stopped wanting to be offended or couldn't handle it. So we've got to have quality of information. Books are hated and feared because they show the pores in the face of life. Anybody ever seen somebody with too much plastic surgery? Either with a photograph or in real life?
Yeah.
All right. They don't look real, do they? Pores are real. They make people human. It's the details that let us know about ourselves that allow us to relate. And without those, life just looks fake and plastic. Like somebody that has too much plastic surgery, right? So that's part one. First thing we need is the quality or texture of information. That's what Montag's missing. Number two is what? Leisure. Which means, what does that really mean?
Time to think.
Say that again.
Time to think.
Time to digest or think. Okay? You need more quality information, and then you need time to think about it, right? And this is an interesting conversation. Quality, texture of information, and the second Montag asks, leisure. Montag responds, oh, but we have plenty of off hours. Now, this next paragraph scares me to my core because I see it every day, right? Look at this one. Off hours, yes, but time to think. If you're not driving 100 miles an hour at a clip where you can't think of anything else but the danger, then you're playing some game or sitting in a room where you can't argue with the four-wall televisor. Do we have a lot of free time? What fills that time?
TV, technology.
Electronics, technology. Now, granted, we don't have the big four-wall visor, but I can watch Netflix on my phone. I can play video games. Whatever it is, but that time begins to be filled by technology. And that, remember, was Beatty's second point. Increase of technology causes a lack of time to reflect, right? So there's no more time to digest it. And then it's pretty interesting. You can't argue with the television. It has dimension. It tells you what to think and blasts it in. It must be right. It seems so right. It rushes you on so quickly to its own conclusions. Your mind hasn't had time to protest. Right? This is social media. This is a 24-hour news cycle pumped into our brains all the time, telling us what to think and how to feel about everything. And it is very difficult to say, whoa, slow down and let me think about that. See, a book, I can leave that right there for a minute. So perfectly timed. I can leave it there and I can think about it. And the truth is, my favorite books are ones I have to set down often to make sure I understand what it is that they're telling me. Right? To really think about. Like when I read that paragraph, I set that down, I'm like, holy crap, that's the world in which I live. Right? And I set it down. And the book waits patiently here for me to come back and make sure that I'm ready to pick it back up and continue. If I hit pause on Netflix, even the image itself is screaming to me, unpause me, keep going, hit play, right? It doesn't wait patiently like a book does. And that's the problem. You can't argue, you can't scream at it, right? Montag says, my wife says books aren't real, and Faber's like, thank God, right? Books can be beaten down with reason. But with all of my knowledge and skepticism, I've never been able to argue with a 100-piece symphony orchestra, full color, 3 dimensions, and being in and part of those incredible parlors, right? Montag is inundated with noise. Has anybody ever been in a car where somebody had to back up or do something and they turned off the radio? You find it weird? It's like, why is my hand-eye coordination affected at all by the noise in the radio? But it is. Because you only have so much bandwidth in your brain. And the radio is taking it up. So your ability to think clearly and focus on what you're doing is diminished the more input your brain is trying to handle at the same time. So you turn off the radio and you back up the vehicle. And it doesn't seem like it makes any sense, but it weirdly does. There is no space for turning off noise here. And if we're not careful in our own lives, if we don't make space to turn off the noise, we can find ourselves in the same situation, right? Take the earbuds out, take a walk outside. Be like the pedestrian in Bradbury's short story or Clarice's uncle. But we've allowed the loss of leisure, the time to digest, the time to think because of technology, right? This is the inverse of Beatty. Now, what's interesting about point 3 is that Faber sets up point 3, first by summarizing. Number 1, as I said, the quality of information. Number 2, the leisure to digest it. And number 3, the right to carry out actions based on what you learned from the interaction of 1 and 2. Okay? The ability to act based on 1 plus 2. Okay? If I interact with high quality information, and I really think about what I read, then I need to be able to act, to manifest my influence and will into the world through act and speech, right? And if we think back to the small North Dakota, Nebraska, all-white town in the 1960s reading To Kill a Mockingbird, maybe that was the only way they could interact with that detail in life, because they didn't live in the South. They read about it, they thought about it, they realized how bad it was. Then ideally they'd be able to go out and act based on those combination of 1 and 2. All right. What we are seeing is that, let's see, flip over my page 86. So maybe the next page for you, find the paragraph that begins, you can't guarantee things like that. You can't guarantee things like that. After all, when we had all the books we needed, we still insisted on finding the highest cliff to jump off. It should just be like a page or so. It's 1 page flip for me.
It's on 82.
82? Okay. The books are to remind us what asses and fools we are. They're Caesar's Praetorian Guard, whispering as the parade roars down the avenue. Remember, Caesar, thou art mortal. The Praetorian Guard was pretty cool. Right? You ever known somebody that was like just obnoxiously arrogant? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Brilliantly, the Caesars were ultimately ended up being worshipped, kind of like the pharaohs. They were considered a manifestation of God on earth. But the Praetorian Guard would be right beside Caesar, so in the middle of the parade that would, cherish and celebrate Caesar and his accomplishments, the guard would whisper like, "You're mortal and you are going to die," as a way to make sure that Caesar remained humble and didn't succumb to his own image. So he continued to see himself as he really was. And it's brilliant. Books do that. They bring us back to reality. And then we get this awesome last little bit, which is the things you're looking for, Montag, are in the world. But the only way the average chap will ever see 99% of them is in a book. I've lived 1,000 lives between the pages of a book. I've been places I will never be or get a chance to go. I've been to places that don't exist anymore and places that never existed in the first place. Right? I've never been to war. I've read a lot from people that have, fiction and nonfiction. I've never been a woman. But I've certainly read lots of works by women and with women as the heroines. And I would like to think that that helps my communication with my wife. She's never been a man. But she's read a lot of books as a fellow English teacher where our communication and our sense of empathy is opened up because we've had so many more experiences than one lifetime would allow you to have by reading. It's like a Cliff's Notes to experiences. It gives you a chance to live multiple lives in the span of the few short years that we exist on this planet. Right? And that's what Montag is missing. And then Faber gives us probably the best advice that he can. Don't ask for guarantees. Life has no guarantees. All right? And don't look to be saved by any one thing, person, machine, or library. There's no idea out there that is going to particularly save you, not one of them. You cannot pin all of your hopes to one ideology, one belief, one movement. Do your own bit of saving. And if you drown, at least die knowing you are headed for shore. Now, I find this sentence to be interesting. Do your own bit of saving. And if you drown, that's an interesting little clause. Does Faber tell Montag that if he tries to save himself, that he will succeed? There's always the chance of failure. You can drown. But when you do, you'll know that you were doing everything within your power to not drown. You didn't sit there, not moving in the water, waiting for somebody to come and rescue you. Swim. Right? At least go a direction. Now, when we take this and we, can I shrink it? Right? And we start to be able to put them side by side. And we can see how this conversation is the inverse of the first conversation we had with Beatty. What are we missing? Quality of detail information. Where did it go? Well, we stopped producing variety based on population. Right? Is this prevalent in our own society? I think you can watch TV at night and pretty much figure that those really great moving shows are far more rare than, you know, the new season of The Voice or some British baking show or whatever it is. Right? We lost the leisure time to be able to digest what we're thinking. Where did that go? Well, technology replaced it. Because of these, this childhood group says, take away everything that hurts me. I can't experience it. I can't handle it. Here, the urge to act and to go on your own adventure, to take control of your life, right? And that's going to be what saves you. And even if it doesn't, you'll die trying, right? And we begin to see the acts of rebellion, right? And this can be a good thing. Rebellion's a good thing. Now, the next section, if this is childhood and adolescence, the next section will be adulthood. Has anybody made it all the way through part 3 at all? A little bit? Anybody into it? Okay. There's a rough suicide in part 3 as well. Keep an eye out on that. We'll talk about that at the end. But part 3 is going to be more as Montag moves into adulthood. And we can really conceptualize that with the concept of acceptance, right? Ineptitude or ignorance, rebellion, and adulthood is acceptance. Now, if we look on page where'd it go? Oh, I lost it. Well, there it is. All right. And you're on page 82, right, with the Praetorian Guard stuff? So it's probably on 82 or 83. See the paragraph that says, but that would just nibble the edges? Montag's idea was to put books in all the firemen's houses and then burn them, right? It'd be like planting drugs in all the cops' houses in order to get the cops arrested. That's essentially the plan, right? Like, that's not the greatest plan. It's a little logistically impossible, but at least, you know, he's thinking. But Faber tells him this: the whole culture is shot through. The skeleton needs melting and reshaping. Good God, it isn't as simple as just picking up a book you laid down half a century ago. Remember, the firemen are rarely necessary. The public itself stopped reading of its own accord, right? So few want to be rebels anymore. He goes on to say, patience, Montag, let the war turn off the families. Our civilization is flinging itself to pieces. Stand back from the centrifuge. Faber's at the point of acceptance. He's like, you can give everybody a book, and it's not going to change them. They are the way they are out of choice, and they've been like this for so long. Civilization will essentially need to collapse and then be rebuilt from the ground up. He's at that stage of acceptance, right? Montag is still wanting to rebel and change things. And Faber's like, dude, it's worse than that. You need to stay out of the way and let this burn itself out. And you can see how that begins to play out in part 3 as Montag moves into the acceptance stage of his development. Cool? I will tell you that I always like to share this stuff as it happens throughout the year. Every year I teach every piece of literature we study. I see something new, that I have never seen in that piece of literature before. And I stop teaching a book or a poem or a play the moment I teach it a year and I don't discover anything new. If I think the well has run dry, then I stop teaching it. This year, with this book in particular, and I have gone over his conversation, and the third one in years prior, but I've never stepped back and looked at how closely they overlay up on each other, right? Because Bradbury, through Beatty and Faber talking to Montag, Bradbury's having a conversation with us as the audience. What are the problems? How are they going to show up? What do we do about them, right? The stuff that's on that dystopia social critique board. But I've never really until this year been able to see how each one of these points directly correlates with the point from the previous conversation. And it'll be neat to go into part 3 of this and see how that conversation grows and overlaps as we move into Burning Bright, which is a great poetic reference. So see if you can figure that out. If you find the reference for the title of part 3. All right, that's it. Questions? Cool. I'll give you part 3 questions tomorrow. Those questions and reading through the end of part 3 will be due on Monday. Cool? Rock and roll. Oh!
May I have 2 Band-Aids?
No.